Modern motorcycle engines are tough. Whether you're on a twin, an inline four, or a big single, these things are built to take a beating. But the damage that actually kills engines early isn't the stuff you'd expect. It's not track days. It's not the occasional redline pull. It's 5 habits that almost every rider does without thinking twice. And by the time you hear the symptom, you're already looking at a 4-figure repair bill. Stick around, because number 1 is the habit I'd bet 90% of people watching this are doing right now, and it's quietly costing you thousands of miles of engine life. Number 1, riding off. Immediately after a cold start. Here's the thing nobody tells you when you buy a bike. Cold oil does not behave like warm oil. At room temperature, most modern 10W40 or 20W50 oils are already thick, but drop the temperature down to 40 or 50 degrees and viscosity can jump dramatically. Oil pressure itself actually comes up fast, within a few seconds of startup on any healthy engine. What takes longer is that thick, cold oil circulating properly and thinning out enough to lubricate smoothly and let the engine settle into a stable idle. On a cold morning, that process can easily take 30 to 60 seconds. So what happens when you fire up the bike, blip the throttle a couple times to warm it up, and immediately pull out into traffic? You are asking your top end to handle real load before that cold, thick oil has had a chance to fully do its job. Do that consistently, and you're looking at accelerated cam wear, scored lifters, and metal contamination in your oil that shows up on every oil analysis after. This is brutal on air-cooled and oil-cooled twins especially, since they rely so heavily on oil for both lubrication and cooling. But even liquid-cooled sport bikes and modern ADV engines aren't immune. I've pulled valve covers on bikes with under 8,000 miles and found scuffing on the cam lobes that had no business being there on a bike that young, and cold starts were the only explanation that made sense. The warning signs creep in slowly, a faint tick from the top end that wasn't there before, a slightly rougher idle right after startup, maybe a puff of blue smoke on cold mornings as worn valve guides start letting oil past. By the time you notice any of that, you're not looking at a cheap fix. Top-end work, depending on your engine, can run anywhere from $600 for a simple valve adjustment and inspection up to $2,000 or more if cam lobes or lifters need replacing. The fix costs you nothing but a minute of patience. Let the bike idle for 30 to 60 seconds, longer if it's genuinely cold outside, then ride gently for the first mile or two before you ask for real throttle. Your engine will forgive a lot of things, but it will not forgive being flogged before the oils had a real chance to do its job. Number 2, short tripping your bike. Constantly. This one flies under the radar because it doesn't feel like abuse at all. You ride 2 miles to the coffee shop, shut it off, ride 2 miles back, an hour later, shut it off again. Repeat 5 times a week. Feels harmless, it isn't. Here's the mechanism. Every internal combustion engine produces condensation and unburned fuel byproducts when it runs, especially during warm-up. A fully warmed engine burns that moisture and fuel residue off through normal operating heat. But if you never run the bike long enough to hit full operating temperature, typically 15 to 20 minutes of steady riding, that moisture and unburned fuel just sits in your oil and your exhaust system. Over time, this dilutes your engine oil, drops its lubricating properties, and accelerates internal corrosion. It also lets carbon and moisture build up inside your exhaust, which on some bikes leads to premature rusting from the inside out. Something you won't see coming until your exhaust is flaking apart at 20,000 miles instead of lasting 60,000 like it should. Fuel-injected bikes handle this slightly better than old carbureted ones, but the oil dilution problem doesn't care what fuel system you're running. I've drained oil from short-trip commuter bikes with under 3,000 miles on the clock that smelled like raw gasoline and looked like it had 8,000 miles on it. That's not normal wear, that's a rider habit wearing the engine out from the inside. The cost adds up in small, sneaky ways. You'll burn through oil life faster, meaning more frequent changes just to stay ahead of the damage. That's an extra $40 to $80 a few times a year you didn't need to spend. Ignore it long enough, and you're looking at accelerated internal corrosion and potentially premature exhaust replacement, which on some bikes runs $400 to $900 for a full system. The fix is simple, even if it's inconvenient. When you can, combine short errands into one longer ride so the engine actually reaches operating temperature. If you know you're stuck doing short trips regularly, take the bike out once a week for a 20 to 30 minute ride specifically to burn that moisture and fuel residue off. Your oil in your exhaust system will last dramatically longer for it. Number 3, lugging the engine at low RPM. I see this one constantly, and it usually comes from good intentions. Riders think running low RPM in a tall gear is easier on the engine, quieter, more relaxed, better on gas. It feels smooth. It is actually one of the worst things you can do to a motorcycle engine. When you're cruising at, say, 2,000 revolutions per minute in top gear at highway speed, you might feel like you're babying the bike. What's actually happening is you're forcing the engine to produce torque well below its efficient operating range, which means every component in that drivetrain, the clutch, the transmission, the primary or chain drive, is absorbing shock loads it wasn't designed to handle at that combination of speed and load. Most motorcycle engines have a genuine sweet spot where torque delivery is smooth and the drivetrain isn't being asked to do something unnatural, but where that sweet spot actually sits depends entirely on the engine. A big cruiser twin might be happiest around 2,500 to 3,000 revolutions per minute. A middleweight sport bike might want closer to 5,000 or 6,000, and a small single could be completely different again. There's no one number that applies across every bike, so it's worth checking your owner's manual or looking at where your specific engine's torque curve actually peaks. Lug the engine below that range consistently, whatever it happens to be, and you accelerate wear on your clutch plates, your transmission gears, and on chain drive bikes, you'll see accelerated chain and sprocket wear from the uneven load pulses. The symptoms sneak up slowly. A slight shudder or clunk when you roll on the throttle from low RPM. A driveline that feels looser than it used to. On chain bikes, more frequent adjustment needed as the chain stretches faster than it should. None of this screams emergency, which is exactly why riders ignore it for years. Eventually, you're looking at a clutch job running $200 to $500, depending on the bike, a chain and sprocket set at $150 to $350. Or in worse cases, transmission wear that can run well over $1,000 to properly address. All from a habit that felt like it was being gentle on the bike. If you feel the engine start to buck, shudder, or feel gutless at low RPM, that is your bike telling you to downshift. Keep the revs in that comfortable mid-range where the engine actually wants to make power. It is not about riding aggressively, it's about giving the drivetrain the RPM range it was engineered around. I actually put together a full maintenance roadmap for riders trying to get real longevity out of their bikes, oil change intervals broken down by engine type, chain and belt maintenance schedules, the RPM ranges specific engines actually like to live in, all the stuff that doesn't make it into the owner's manual because it varies so much by model. It's called the Engine Longevity Roadmap. Links in the description if you want it. Number 4, shutting down. Immediately after hard riding. This one catches even experienced riders off guard because it feels completely normal. You've been pushing the bike, maybe a spirited canyon run or a hard highway stretch. You pull into the driveway, kill the engine, and walk away. For most naturally aspirated engines, that's genuinely not a big deal. Your engine isn't going to cook itself from a normal hot shutdown. But if you're riding a turbocharged bike, this habit is a real problem, and it's one a lot of turbo owners don't fully appreciate until they've already done the damage. Here's why turbos are different. A turbocharger spins at extremely high speeds and runs significantly hotter than the rest of the engine, and it depends entirely on circulating oil to both lubricate its bearings and carry heat away from the turbine housing when you've been riding hard and pull in with the turbo glowing hot. Shutting the engine off immediately stops that oil flow instantly. The oil sitting inside the turbo's bearing housing has nowhere to go, and with no fresh oil moving through, it can bake and break down right there under residual heat, a process that leaves behind hard carbon deposits inside the turbo itself. This is exactly why cars and trucks with factory turbos have used turbo timers for decades, letting the engine idle on its own after you've parked specifically to protect the turbo. On a turbocharged bike, ignoring this can mean turbo bearing wear and carbon buildup that shows up as a whining or rattling sound from the turbo, sluggish boost response, or in worse cases, oil starting to seep past the turbo seals. A turbo rebuild or replacement is not a cheap fix, realistically $600 to $1,500 depending on the bike and whether you need a full unit or just a rebuild kit. That's a real bill for a habit that costs nothing to avoid. If you're on a naturally aspirated engine, the vast majority of bikes on the road, you don't need to stress about this one nearly as much. It's still good practice to let things settle for 30 seconds or so after a hard ride rather than shutting down bone dry from full load just to let temperatures normalize evenly, but you're not risking the kind of internal damage a turbo owner is. The fix, if you're on a turbocharged bike, is simple. After a hard ride, let the engine idle for 1 to 2 minutes before shutting it down, giving that oil time to keep circulating through the turbo and carry the heat away properly. If you're on a standard naturally aspirated engine, a shorter cooldown of 20 to 30 seconds is plenty. More about easing the transition than preventing damage. Either way, it costs you almost nothing and it's cheap insurance for the bikes that actually need it. Number 5. Ignoring the maintenance intervals that don't feel urgent. This last one isn't a single habit, it's a pattern, and it's the one that quietly does the most damage over the life of the bike. Every motorcycle has multiple separate maintenance intervals: engine oil, valve clearance checks, coolant if you're liquid cooled, drive chain or belt service, and on shaft or chain drive bikes, separate lubricant for the final drive. Riders treat these like suggestions instead of requirements, especially the ones that don't have an obvious symptom yet. Here's what actually happens when you stretch these intervals. Engine oil loses its anti-wear additive package over time and mileage, and once that protection drops off, you start seeing accelerated wear on cams, bearings, and cylinder walls, where that shows up as metal content in your next oil analysis. Valve clearances that go unchecked can drift out of spec, leading to either noisy valve train or, in worse cases, valves that don't seal properly and start burning. Chains that don't get lubed and adjusted on schedule stretch faster, wear their sprockets prematurely, and in bad cases can even damage the swing arm if they're allowed to get dangerously loose. None of these show symptoms early. That's exactly the trap. A bike can run seemingly fine for thousands of miles past its service intervals right up until it doesn't, and then you're not looking at a routine maintenance bill, you're looking at a real repair. The math here is stark. A full service, oil, filter, valve check, chain adjustment typically runs somewhere around $150 to $300 at a shop, depending on your bike. Skip that for long enough and you're gambling with a valve job that can run $800 to $1,500, or a drivetrain replacement that can easily hit $400 to $700 on top of that. I've seen riders lose 15,000 to 20,000 miles of usable engine life-chasing savings of a couple $100s a year on deferred maintenance. The fix is unglamorous, but it works. Follow your owner's manual intervals, not the "it still feels fine" method. Keep a simple log of your oil changes, valve checks, and chain service so you're not guessing when something was last done. It is the least exciting advice in this entire video, and it is also the single most effective thing you can do to make your engine last. So there you have it, 5 habits that feel completely normal that almost every rider is guilty of at least one of, and that quietly strip years off your engine's life without ever giving you a clear warning until the damage is already done. The good news is every single one of these is free or nearly free to fix. It's not about riding scared or babying your bike. It's about understanding what these engines actually need to live a long, healthy life. If this video helped you catch a habit you didn't realize you had, do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. We're building something here, and every subscriber gets us closer to the next milestone. Drop a comment and let me know which one of these 5 you're guilty of. I guarantee you're not the only one. Ride smart.